Hey, all right, everybody. It is Monday, November 7th, the day before Election Day. It is noon in the East. It is 9 a.m. in the West. This is your Election Eve edition of Lunch with Lincoln. I am your host for today, Reed Galen. I am joined once again by the inimitable dynamic duo, Trygve Olson and Jeff Timmer. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me.
Hey, glad to be here, Reed.
So all of this energy, guys, is like a little kid who's overtired, right? Like, you want to go to bed, but you can't go to bed, and so you're just a little bit flying around everywhere, trying to figure out what to do. And as you all both know, because you've been through as many of these things as I have, is that if you're working on a campaign, and you're not in the field. And if you are working on a campaign and you're not in the field, you shouldn't be watching this, right? You should be out on the doors. Strategically, you sort of shot your shot, right, guys? Jeff, if there's an ad to be made, it's been made. If there's time to be bought, it's been bought. If there's phone calls, texts, maybe you can do some of that stuff. The time for an October surprise is now more than a week old. And so, you're just sort of hanging on for dear life at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's we were talking about what we do on Election Day and how that has changed over time. I mean, tomorrow I'm going to literally be spending the day at a casino.
Mm-hmm. Well, as well you should.
Spending the evening too.
I'm going to spend the evening there.
Well, let's be
I'm
clear.
putting it all on blue. Going to let it ride.
Depending on how well he does, Trygve will depend on how long he stays at said casino.
I was on the predicted market this morning because I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll just put some money.
What? All right. So Trygve, tell us, what were the predictive markets telling us about these things tomorrow?
It's interesting because the Senate race is so a lot of them right now. And let's face it, the predictive markets at one time had a lot of foolish money in them, but now it's mostly people like us, I think, that are playing the predictive markets. So it's a bunch of people who have maybe insights. Most of them were showing, so like Pennsylvania was, Fetterman was selling at about 36, 38. So it's like a 2/3, 1/3 split. Georgia, the same. Mm-hmm. I ended up looking at it and thinking, all right, where do I think there's a better chance than whatever they're marking? I ended up buying Cortez Mastow at about 27 cents. Subsequently, she went up to 36, but I'm not selling yet. So, it's interesting because the markets, those predictive markets, which are actually really accurate, typically, are showing like, a lot of those races, 2/3, 1/3. Kelly favored. It was interesting. You can buy Tudor Dixon to win at 40 cents. I was thinking about selling Tudor Dixon at 40 cents because that is stupid money, I think.
All right. No jokes, Timmer. No jokes on that.
No, I'm not making any I'm pretty glass half full about the way things are looking tomorrow. When it comes to the data, the evidence before us doesn't line up with the rhetoric in the reporting that's gone on the last couple of weeks. And so I'm a little more bullish on the chances for democracy having a good day tomorrow. Maybe not a great day, not running the table, but having a pretty damn good day for democracy. When Shapiro wins in Pennsylvania, when Whitmer wins in Michigan, when Tony Evers wins in Wisconsin.
So let's talk about that, guys, because let's go back to March and April. And for those of you guys out there who don't know this, Trygve and Jeff are really responsible for the strategy of where and how we're going to go into a lot of the races that we plan. And their concept and conception of how we needed to look at this election cycle was different than I'd say just about any other political organization, because in DC, both Republicans and Democrats, and at the state level too, right? Everybody's got a committee for their particular thing. The House of Representatives, the United States Senate, governors, attorneys general, blah, 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 blah. But what you guys did was you ranked every race in the country based on how important it was the continuation of American democracy. And what we came up with was what you guys call our existential states. And so, Jeff, you just named those: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, as the top three. And those are the states by which if Republicans are in charge and are able to mess with the presidential election results in 2024, it would be impossible basically for a Democrat to win. Not much further down the list are Nevada and Arizona. Because again, those are states that Nevada has gone more Democrat than it has, it's been going Democratic for a while. Arizona was a surprise to all of us, I think, election night 2 years ago when Fox called it, relatively speaking, early in the evening. And one that I think has particularly stuck in Trump's craw. He's now got, to say that Kari Lake is an avowed Trumpist, I think is an insult to people with Trump actually is their name. And so, Trygve, give us a little bit of a sense of, in the context of how I've just laid it out, how you see, the next 24, or really the rest of the week going, because we know these races aren't going to be decided. They will be decided tomorrow. We won't know the results of them till maybe Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Right. I think we all feel pretty good about Pennsylvania and Josh Shapiro. We ranked elections, so it's the governor's race in Pennsylvania. I think we feel pretty good about Shapiro. I think we feel great about Gretchen Whitmer, given the kind of campaign she ran and how she used her time in office. I think, Tony Evers is a coin flip. Timmer and I went out to Wisconsin last week and spent a couple of days on the ground there, talking to a lot of people. And, much like the credible polling in the state, all of it shows it a coin flip. It shows Ron Johnson up just a little bit. Ultimately, at the end of the day, in that race, it's going to depend on, is Tony Evers able to pull a couple more percent of Republicans than he's currently getting and split independent voters. He's splitting independent voters in the polls, which is why it's tied. He's only at 2% of Republicans. And therein lies, if he loses, that probably is going to be where it happens. Arizona, Katie Hobbs has not run a very good campaign, quite honestly. She's run to the left and hasn't engaged in the way that I think she should have, and that's given Kari Lake an opportunity. Mark Kelly should be fine, but then it becomes a question. Kari Lake wins. She's not going to commit to honoring the election results. We'll see what happens in the Secretary of State's race there. A lot of Republicans have come out and endorsed the Democrat. That Secretary of State's race, in terms of what stuff I'm going to be watching, is elevated if Kari Lake is ending up winning in the governorship. Nevada,
right. And in that race is a guy named Adrian Fontes, who I met this past spring when I was down there. Terrific guy. Had been in charge of elections in Maricopa County. So along with Katie Hobbs, who is this current Secretary of State in Arizona, was on the front lines against all of the psycho ninjas or whatever they called themselves, right? I think just as a second on this, on the Hobbs Lake race, Trygve and Jeff, is that what it seemed to me was that it was a lot of times in politics, especially amongst the consultant class and the staff, the staffers, is first do no harm, right? And that makes sense up to a point until and unless you realize, well, like, if I don't go out and make the case for why I should be elected, it's really, really easy for my opponent to define me. And we've seen this. We saw this with Youngkin and Flatter in Virginia. Now, it was a different situation, but also, it was a late primary. I think there was an expectation that, in the magical thinking of 2015, that just because Lake is nuts and says things that don't otherwise sound like a normal politician should say, that she doesn't have any chance of winning, right? This whole idea that she would be easier to beat in a general than the woman that she beat, who was I'm going to say, more moderate Republican, such as it was. But then the Hobbs campaign, I think two things happened, Jeff, I want to get your take on.
Mm-hmm.
One is that the Hobbs campaign allowed her campaign to be defined not only by Lake, but also by the media and by outsiders. And then secondly, because as Trygve noted, they were unwilling to move to the middle where there was plenty of fertile ground with, I think, conservative leaning independents, true independents, and even soft Republicans. It allowed Lake to occupy that space just on the natural because nobody was there. And it allowed her to become, mainstream. And I want to talk about that in a second too, is that, she says these crazy ass things and, a reporter asks her a straight question and she goes, "You're lying. You're lying. If you think Joe Biden won 81 million votes in 2020, you're the conspiracy theorist."
Yeah, I think that Kari Lake is a fatally flawed candidate who's been allowed to rehabilitate those fatal flaws. She has the Hobbs campaign has been on defense almost throughout the entire year, even before the primary gave Arizona the clear choice of Kari Lake versus Katie Hobbs. It's very difficult to win a close election when you're back on your heels playing defense with the narrative and kind of the context of the race being defined by the opponent who's on offense. If that's the position you find, it's not certain that Hobbs can't win. She may, but it's right now the advantage goes to Kari Lake. And yes, she had an assist from the kind of being normalized. The Republicans are great at normalizing the abnormal. The Doug Ducey, who endorsed her opponent in the primary, the outgoing Republican governor, had said Kari Lake was not fit to be governor, changed his tune. The Glenn Youngkins, the whole Republican
Josh Hawley showed up last night.
Yeah, but even the Hawley's more of the mega, carnival barker side of the party. The more what's viewed as the normal Republicans, those who stood up to Trump and certified the election, like Doug Ducey, they've embraced Lake and normalized her. So she's had an assist from that, but that could have still been overcome, I think, by just a strategic counteroffensive by the Hobbs and the Democrats that just never materialized.
And Trygve, to that end, we shouldn't. I don't want to spend too much time bashing because that's not helpful. But I mean, the one thing that's sort of started coming to light for me, at least in my head, was that Katie Hobbs has been on the front lines of democracy. She was and is the person who was defending against all of this stuff, sitting from her perch at the Secretary of State's office and saying, I was fighting people like her. I have been fighting people like her for the last 2 years or 3 years or whatever. Like, we know what we get with her, right? Right. We know that, and a family member of mine who's very conservative, over Trump, but very conservative, said, well, what does Kari Lake say about what she wants to do for the people of Arizona? And I said, she doesn't say anything.
No.
She doesn't say anything. She talks about immigration, but, she also said she's going to arrest, when the FBI and ATF agents get off the plane at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, she's going to have them arrested and thrown in jail. Like that, I mean, that might get some sort of, QAnon weirdo fired up. But like for the average person, that's like, what are you talking
about? Yeah, I mean, I think, again, could she win? Yeah, she could. But I think that the issues there are more tactical and strategic at the end of the day. Not debating was a real mistake. And here's the thing: when I talk about the rules for dealing with autocrats, one of the rules is rule number 2: always speak truth to power. You have to take advantage of opportunities to speak truth to power. And for the people who are saying, well, you're wailing on Katie Hobbs, yeah, a little bit, because honestly, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, that's not fair to Katie Hobbs, but Carrie Lake is literally an existential threat to democracy in the United States. And when we get to 2024, the people who are saying don't be critical of what Katie Hobbs has done, we're trying to use it as a teaching moment, because they're going to be like, well, Arizona isn't going to have a free and fair election. How are we possibly going to, elect a president when one of the states isn't going to honor the results in a state that Democrats probably win?
Right.
Well, it's tipping points. It's, in cases like this, democracies fail when you have a number of tipping points where you had opportunities to change the trajectory and people didn't take advantage of them. And so when we're being critical of Katie Hobbs, quite honestly, if you listen to how much we're critical of people in our own former party, how much, I criticize Mitch McConnell, who I worked for years, all the time, for not standing up for Trump and voting for impeachment. It's the exact same thing. So you don't get it both ways. We're just trying to call it as we see it. And
just this is probably inaccurate, but you're both football fans, and Jeff, congratulations to your Detroit Lions on a masterful victory yesterday against some green and yellow team. Anyway, is that like in a football game, there's like 100 plays, right? And in any football game, like maybe 10 or 15 of those plays matter, right? For every 86-yard touchdown pass, right, there's 30 second and threes, right? Like, 6 yards over the middle, whatever. And the stuff like, Trygve talks about in the tipping points, like not debating was a tipping point, right? Yeah. It was okay. And look, well, Carrie Lake's just going to lie the whole time. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Like we know that, and you can say that's
Donald Trump. Donald Trump. He did for 4 years, and he's about to start doing it again when he gets in the race.
Yeah. Well, right.
By the way, Reed, you're going to a dangerous place on football analogies, given that Timmer's Lions just beat the Packers, and
you weren't listening. You literally missed everything I said.
Because I was so busy thinking about Aaron Rodgers bouncing passes off of people's helmets, and it's a real sore spot.
Listen, next week we'll be on to what's wrong with the Packers. So, which we could do hours a week on. I'm sure people already do. Right. But Jeff, talk about those tipping points, because every campaign that we've been in has them. Right. Yeah, well, and you don't know. It's a lot of times you don't know they're going to happen.
Right. Well, I was thinking more of those moments that end up in retrospect defining the outcome of campaigns. Those will become real clear by the end of the week. Right. But I was thinking of the difference between the Arizona governor's race and the governor's race in Michigan or in Pennsylvania. And it's not just the fact that there's an incumbent governor in Michigan. The Whitmer campaign has done a tremendous job of doing what I said earlier that Hobbs failed to do, and that's seize the counteroffensive, play offense, define the opponent, punch them in the mouth, rhetorically, take the fight to them, get on the debate stage when you know your opponent's going to be out there spewing QAnon kookery and outright hate and lies like Tudor Dixon did in the debates with Gretchen Whitmer. And the danger that I guess I worry about is if Katie Hobbs wins, that the lesson that many will learn is that's the strategy to defeat these people. And I think it will be in spite of the strategy and those tactical decisions that they've made in the campaign that cause her to win. It will be because of forces that are larger than those controlled by her campaign, and ultimately pull her across, where the lesson in how to, I think, conduct the campaign that people need to take it to these looming wannabe autocrats in places like Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and in the key states in 2024 is to do the Whitmer-Shapiro model of broadening your appeal, centralizing your incumbency, your message, your campaign, co-opting as much of the other side, making it hard to be defined as the as an extremist. I don't think anybody would look at anybody sane, and certainly not a majority of voters look at Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, or Tony Evers as an extremist. They're very pragmatic, very central in their personality and their style and in their governing. And I think that is the way to build durable majorities that can withstand this America First MAGA Trumpism and do it successfully.
Trygve, what advice do you have if what the projections we see are to be believed? It appears that the Republican Party will take over the U.S. House of Representatives. It's an amazing thing to see, and McCarthy's a favorite bugaboo of ours. Was that at the end of August, beginning of September, they were clearly panicking that suburban women were just fleeing them as quickly as they could. They came in with this sort of half-assed commitment to America thing, which they held on to for approximately 5 days, and we helped make sure that wasn't going to have any purchase. But quickly from there, Trygve, McCarthy by the end of September and October was, impeachment, questioning Ukraine, all of the crazy. He's even gone. He's now doubling and tripling down on those things, even in now. You saw Marjorie Taylor Greene at a rally just the other day say, "When we take the House, not one more dollar for Ukraine." That Bob Costa of CBS was reporting this morning that they may make Greene vice chair of the Oversight Committee, right? After she's had no committee assignments. And just as an aside, she now has, in the last 10 days, developed her own mainstreamness, right? She was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine, right? Which now, Draper did an incredible job exposing who she is, and most people who support her probably didn't read the article, but there she is at the cover of a mainstream. And now, like, the media is covering her love life, right? Like, she's an otherwise normal celebrity. So what are we gonna do here, Trig, as we see this, where they will not wait. A Republican House in waiting will not say, well, we'll wait to tell you what we're going to do. January 3rd, when we actually take over. There's going to be the things they're going to say they're going to do. There'll be an internecine fight for leadership, I assume, outside of McCarthy, who's basically, he's the golden calf at this point. So what do you think? What do you think that looks like, and what do we need to do to help counter some of that stuff? Impeachment, debt ceiling, Hunter Biden, all that.
Well, I think we have to understand that they're going to try and live in the present moment, right? So they're not going to want to talk about what's happened in the past. They're not going to want to talk about the future. They're not going to want to talk about facts. They're going to want to build narratives around, and whatever facts fit those narratives, that's fine, because what they're trying to do is increase fear. We have to just push back on it. We have to show that we're not afraid of it. And I don't just mean us as an organization, but I mean those who are pro-democracy, and we have to stand up and whack it. Greene had a tweet over the weekend, and I thought it was about, I forget what it was about Ukraine, Russia, some of that kind of stuff, communists. And, Liz Cheney just took her apart, right? With, the simplicity of it. USSR, Russia, communism, bad, right? That's what we're going to have to do. And it's going to have to be all hands on deck. And the problem is with what they do, they flood the zone with, cognitively simplistic answers so that everybody can come up with their own facts and truths. We're just going to have to focus full time on trying to counter that. And the other thing I would say is, Reed, it looks like DeSantis may in fact challenge Trump. If that happens, or whoever is challenging Trump, we have to force a division. We need to, I talk about zero-sum judo is using, their tactics against them. Divide and conquer. We have we have to try and precipitate fights within that. If there's a Republican majority in the House and you have two Republicans like DeSantis and Trump running, we have to do everything we can to fan the flames of division, get them fighting amongst themselves.
So let's I don't want to skip over tomorrow, but we know that Jeff, to Trygve's point, Trump has, the Axios and other media outlets were reporting late last week that the week of November 14th, a week from today, that it is likely that Trump will do some sort of announcement announcing his third presidential run, right? And that, at a rally over the weekend, he called DeSantis Ron DeSanctimonious, right? Not his best effort, but I think that it really is less about the effort and more about the fact that he did it.
Sure. Well, it was the mere fact that he was doing a rally in Florida, right before the election, when the DeSantis race and the Rubio race aren't particularly close, according to polls. It was more, that whole rally was all plays into the psychology of the race between Trump and the potential of a challenge by DeSantis. That was Trump going into the yard and peeing all over, marking his territory, and using Marco Rubio. And using Marco Rubio is the neutered pet to show DeSantis, look what I did this is what I did to this guy. He's there as my lapdog.
That's a brilliant way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it was showcasing his dominance. And if DeSantis really wants to take that on, I think that his debate with Charlie Crist showed a not ready for primetime kind of guy, where the rhetoric far outweighs the reality of DeSantis being ready to seize the brass ring of the Republican nomination, especially against Trump. I mean, I just think that Trump will do to Ron DeSantis what he did to Jeb Bush and Chris Christie and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and John Kasich and everybody else, and that is he's not afraid to pee all over the carpet, pee all over the yard, and those guys still don't understand the game we're in.
So speaking of not understanding the game we're in, to stay on this topic for a second, Timur, I completely agree with you on the DeSantis debate performance, which sounds small, but again, in these moments, right, is why I thought from the get-go the guy, was an overpriced stock that just, you either got it, you don't. And he showed that, like, if you couldn't take on Charlie Crist, who admittedly has been doing this a long time, and do anything other than have that like dead-eyed, doll look on your face, I'm sure Trump looked at that and said, I've got this guy's number. But Trygve, the anti-Trump people, the Jonah Goldbergs of the world, and all these people who think that somehow, the Republican Party will return to normalcy, and even if it did, somehow they'd want these people to be the spokespeople of it, right? But look, he's an Ivy Leaguer. He cares about things. He's a true conservative. Like, what amount of ayahuasca are these people doing, right, to convince themselves on a daily basis that somehow, like, there's any return to normalcy?
Well, so I think it's a hope, right? And the reality is DeSantis is going to come under a bunch of pressure to run, mostly from the major donor set of the Republican Party.
Right? Ken Griffin of Chicago said he wants to,
already, yeah. And
which goes to show you that you can be a brilliant business person and not know the first goddamn thing about politics. So, and not really recognize the bigger threats of what your actions may entail. Right.
So you're going to have the major donor set. You're going to have the silent set in the U.S. Senate. The McConnells and all these people that are going to want, a bunch of the governors who are quietly going to be wanting to egg DeSantis on. Trump's not going to give up the ring easy. I don't know. I think it sets up for a pretty big fight. The problem that they have is, though, Trump world has done such a good job of commandeering the the mechanisms of power within the Republican Party process that, I mean, they already have a history of canceling primaries and just saying Donald Trump's going to be our winner. In a normal world, if the path to upending Trump would be not probably in Iowa, but in New Hampshire, and beating him and then setting something up, and people start to believe that it's possible, and then it changes the whole dynamic, as you guys know from having been involved in those things.
But I mean, let me ask you this, though,
I think at the end of the day, for pro-democratic forces, we want them fighting as much as possible for who is the most pure MAGA and what is that version. That is how you beat extremist movements. You get them fighting amongst themselves, and radicalized movements over purity tests.
But Jeff, don't you think that if a DeSantis were to make a move like that, that it immediately draws in Pence, Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Cruz, Hawley? Because here's the thing is, like, they all hate each other, right? But they're sure as hell not going to give Ron DeSantis a one-on-one shot to be the boss. Do you think it draws more people in? Pence is out there, right? Does Larry Hogan get in? I guess my question is, like, do you think that they would allow a one-on-one setup where now they've all got to, potentially now, bow down before DeSantis? I'm not sure that they would anyway, because I think that DeSantis is capable of instilling fear in people like Trump was. Or this sort of messianic, loyalty. But do you think it draws in these other goons who are like, well, if he's going to do it, I'm going to do it, if nothing else, just to make sure that he doesn't get through?
I think we're going to see the classic, everybody who wants to volunteer step forward, and those guys are going to all step back, leaving DeSantis standing out there. Now, Larry Hogan might run because he's more of a symbolic opposition.
Right.
It would be a principled, or what, he's still under the delusion that there's, that the patient can be saved, and instead of recognizing that hospice is an order.
Right.
When it comes to the party. But I think that the Pompeos or Josh Hawleys or Ted Cruz's are not, they're going to see what Trump does to DeSantis before dipping their toe into the water at this time and challenging him. If they might be calculating that DeSantis might weaken Trump and ultimately become unviable because Trump will destroy him in the process of being weakened. And then they'll jump in and try to kind of salvage something at that point. But I think that they've really set themselves up to, like, I watched Ted Cruz, and he's under the delusion that he can somehow, that he's liked by MAGA and can be the Republican nominee. And I think that he's lacking self-awareness in that. And he'll be very calculated to not be disloyal to Trump at this point. It's not that he's just been sitting there since 2016, licking his wounds, waiting for the opportunity to, get a payback to Trump. He wants to be seen as the loyal soldier who is ready to step in if Trump is unable or unwilling to run for any other reason.
So here's the thing.
All right. So
can I say something?
Wait. Just before, hold on 1 second. Actually, I'm changing my thesis, because I agree with you, Jeff, which is they don't need to get in to destroy DeSantis. They can do that from the outside. It's a much safer place to do it, because as soon as you put your name on a ballot someplace against Trump, you're anti-Trump. Yes, Timmer, this is why you're around, because you're much smarter than I am. That is the new working theory I have. Trygve, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So here's I agree with that working theory. And it is the genius of Timmer articulating it. But here's the other dynamic that's going on in this, is that, over the weekend, there was the Casey DeSantis on the 8th day God created Ron DeSantis. Okay? And so that was going on. Secondarily, Mark
Jesus, I'm asking you, what's happening?
Oh, yes, exactly. Literally. Second, Mark Short was on a show with Dana Bash, and the last time I had seen Mark was like a week earlier, as he was wandering through Dulles with his lawyers. But he didn't stop to say hi. But the thing is, so Mark's on and he's test running a Pence message, right? So Pence has always positioned himself as the evangelical guy. DeSantis's guys know that the path to Trump is somehow a coalition of DeSantis, I'm the acceptable MAGA, coupled with evangelicals. That's how he gets through Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina, right? That's where he confronts Trump. But I'm not sure if I'm the Mike squared, that would be Pence and Short, that if DeSantis gets in with Trump, that I don't hold on, I go out, I do my book tour, I let DeSantis get cannibalized, and then I try and jump in as the guy who coalesces a coalition of anti-Trump evangelicals after DeSantis has laid some hits on him. And now you've got DeSantis in the race, pulling some of Trump's MAGA, and you try and run as the evangelical anti-Trump candidate as Mike Pence. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to work, but I think that's where they see their lane. And as you guys all know, and our viewers might find this interesting, if you were to get any political consultants in a room with any potential candidates, they try and come up with some lane through which they could get elected president, because we all believe that we can figure out the lane that works. Most of them are as ridiculous as, they're not viable, but we all think we can come up with the lane to do it.
It's also a convenient shorthand. It's also
Tom Cotton figured out he has no lane. In part, he has no lane because his consulting firm is, one of the partners is going to run Donald Trump's campaign. So there's that. That's playing around too.
Yeah. I mean, so let's end that parlor game for the moment and focus back on Trump again. So he is likely to, look, he said he might announce tomorrow in Ohio or today in Ohio. Who the hell knows, right? And don't worry, Donald, we're ready for you. The pirate flag will fly in time.
We'll be inside your head again.
Well, we're already there.
We're not running around right now, Donald, but soon.
Right.
The hamsters will move.
But, there will have to be, Jeff. Now, Trump will say whatever he's going to say. It will be Biden, gas prices, crime, right? Maybe he can run on that for 2 years. Maybe it's just Trump, right? But do you see a situation in which, let's say that what all of the voters think about all those, it's probably in the target states of 2020, it's probably maybe 150, 200,000 Republican voters who laid off Trump 2 years ago. Do you think that number shrinks, that there will be more that go home to him? Or do you think that number grows because, like my family members who are very conservative, they want nothing to do with the guy until maybe it's like, okay, well, we've got Trump versus Biden again, right? Is there, I guess my question, I'm being inartful, is there more fleeing of otherwise quote unquote normal Republicans from Trump because they just don't want it and they're just sick of it?
I think that the best case scenario for democracy would be the rematch against. I think to answer your question, it depends. I think as long as Biden remains in the picture, the prospect of a coalition similar to 2020 and
Democrats are throwing their phones across the room all over the country right now.
Well, but I think that the worst thing is that unknown. I mean, if it's
I agree.
Donald Trump versus Bernie
it's the Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, it would not have turned out. It's the horror trailer that they did on Saturday Night Live. I mean, that's what it's. Hillary is not the answer. Bernie is not the answer. Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg is not the answer. A long drawn out fist fight that lasts until May or June or the convention is not the way to beat Donald Trump. The best way is to it's dance with the date that brung you. It's the guy that's done it before, despite whatever flaws, despite whatever 4 years has made in his physical or his health. None of that matters as much as the guy who's done it before, to me. And so I think that the narrative for this race, yes, it's going to be dictated largely. It's going to be about Trump. It's going to be another referendum on Trump. But the vacuum that will exist with each passing hour that Joe Biden leaves his future ambiguous is going to play into Trump's hand. Now, I don't think that Biden has to announce tonight or before Trump. I think that Trump, with a little bit of a vacuum, will do Donald Trump things, and then Joe Biden can say, look, I've seen this guy go out and light his ass on fire and threaten to burn down democracy in America. I need to step in. He'll let the moment create the kind of the draft Biden, rather than let's throw it. Oh my God, we have this existential threat. Let's throw everything into chaos, and who knows who we pick. He'll let the moment create the need for him to step in and fill it.
Well, and I will say this is that from my perspective, Joe Biden is a man who's met his moment twice in the last couple of years. One, when he beat Donald Trump, and then second, when I believe that without Joe Biden in office, and I mean Joe Biden specifically, that the stealing, STEELING of NATO and West and Europe against Russian aggression, I think without him standing across the Pacific saying, I'm here, we're not going anywhere. I think that, as bad as things are in Ukraine, by now they've probably already pushed into Moldova. And I think that can't be underestimated. And there's a part of me too, and I might have said this before, which is, once you sit behind that resolute desk, it's pretty hard for anybody to tell you to get up, right? And especially in a first term, looking into a second. And if I were him, I'd be first of all, I'm not sure how many people around him want him to retire, right? Because those are, if you've got walk-in privileges to the Oval Office, you want to hold on to those as long as you can. But there's also the part where he's looking around going, you know what, I'm the only one that has beaten this guy, and I'm the only one that can beat this guy. And Trygve, I'm not sure I disagree with him.
Well, incumbent presidents tend to get reelected, so there's that as well. Right. In fact, the only two that I can recall off the top, well, there's three who lost: George H.W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, and Donald Trump. And so, Donald, we know you're watching. You're in pretty good company there. You got Jimmy Carter and George H.W. Bush as losers.
Both of whom, let me just say, became heroes in their ex-presidency.
Fantastic human beings.
It's hard to believe
they were already good human beings, but they used the role of former president to do good for Americans and the world, as opposed to Trump, who did only good things for the Saudis.
Whereas Donald Trump has spent the entire time bitching about how he lost and seeking revenge and plotting. They were also in both cases actually surrounded by other people who went on to do amazing things, whereas the Trump people have gone and been talking heads and bilking and grifting off of a bunch
potential
of
federal
people.
defendants.
Yeah, right. That too. Lawyering up. It's not, I mean, honestly, it's it's a really hard question in terms of, and it's the pickle we're in, right? If it's Trump against Biden, I get the Saturday Night Live skit kind of got to the heart of it, but as you pointed out, Reed, Joe Biden has met his moment. And if you look at leadership and how Biden has led as it relates to NATO and Ukraine, both the moments where he has led from the front and the moments where he's led from behind and moved chess pieces around, along with his team, he has clearly met his moment, and he has risen to the occasion on that moment. And had Donald Trump won, I think we have to take John Bolton at his word. it probably wouldn't be Moldova. It'd be the Baltic states or Poland that Putin would be rolling into, because Donald Trump was going to pull the United States out of NATO. And I think one of the places that we are going to have to fight, because the majority of Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, want to stand with Ukraine. The House Republican caucus, when the Republicans take over, does not want to do that. And that is going to be something that is really a point of cognitive dissonance, because I will tell you, as you guys both know, and many of our viewers may not, I spent a ton of time in Ukraine. I've spent a ton of time in that part of the world. I've spent a ton of time working with those fighting for democracy in across that region, including in Russia. And I will tell you, when you see Ukrainians going without heat, going without water this winter, just know, if Vladimir Putin could do that to your hometown, where you live right now, he would do that to you. He would do that to you. And when Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kevin McCarthy and these people are like, not another dollar for Ukraine, those people are going through that because he'd like to be doing it to you and he can't.
Right.
And if you're truly a conservative, if you're truly a Republican, if you're truly an American, you have to recognize that those who are saying not another dollar for Ukraine, secure our border first, all the rest of it, are taking the side of autocratic actors who would be more than happy to burn your own home down to subjugate you to their rule, as they're doing in Ukraine. And that is a place most Americans get that. Like, we're seeing the ad that Lincoln Project did on Ukraine and House Republicans is getting opened at an 85 to 90% rate, or in the places that we're placing it. It resonates. And when you're over Thanksgiving, if you're seeing your Republican friends at Thanksgiving or family members and they get going, ask them about that, particularly if they were a Reagan Republican at some point. Drill it into them. Sorry.
Well, and Jeff, I think no, not at all. And Jeff, that's the one thing I've noticed. We tend to think of, and I think the data bears this out, the Republican voters tend to be older and whiter. But those older and whiter voters also, remember the Cold War. They lived it. Some of them served. Many of them served during it. All of our grandparents fought in World War II. And they fought fascism, and then in their own way they fought communism. The fight against fascism for America took 4 years. The fight against communism took another 50. And so, it's one of those things where I could see it in some of my older family members when Russia invaded Ukraine. And then that, we saw the January 6th hearings, that they didn't like what they saw in America, right? Yeah, they didn't like what they saw coming out of Fox. They didn't like what they saw coming out of Trump. And that's not the America they remember, and it's not the America they want.
Yeah, most of this election has centered around introspective things here in the country, not on the world affairs, foreign affairs, national security affairs. Even though Russia and Ukraine have clearly been a factor in the race, but I think looking at how the Republicans have largely come down, the Republican faces, the Republican candidates, those who will be in power. I noticed one of the top spending congressional races in the country is one in Michigan between Alyssa Slotkin and a state senator who is an Army veteran named Tom Barrett, 40-year-old, spent 20 years in the Army, including time in Iraq.
The CIA?
She wins, but the rhetoric. Liz Cheney came in and supported Alyssa Slotkin, the Democrat, in a close contested race last week. The response from the Republicans, including the candidate, is talking about warmongering people like Liz Cheney and Alyssa Slotkin who want to draw us in to a war with Russia. It's siding with Putin effectively in that rhetoric is a response to it, is in the nods, the Republicans largely all going along with this. It signals such a shift in what we were just talking about there, that kind of incongruous stance with I think a lot of older Republican voters is something that hasn't been exploited enough and needs to be exploited going forward, because I do think that that is a critical place where a break can be forced. Is the role of the shining city on the hill, that inspiring vision of Ronald Reagan, that Republicans, people who came of age or were of age during that time, like me and you, all of us here, are find that as something that defines what's good about America, not what's necessarily good about the Republican Party. It always was, but it's good about America, and it's good about our role in the world, and the concept of liberty and freedom and democracy. It can seem esoteric and quaint, but it's very real to our identity. And I think the Democrats need to lean into that. And Biden is perfectly poised to do that. As you said earlier, rise to that moment. In Game 7, who do you want on the mound? You want a gamer who's been there before, who knows how to win.
Well, here's the other thing. But just to say that, though, what is it, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, guys? The House Progressive Caucus put out this letter that they, to the White House, that said that, that we needed to start considering negotiations with Russia. Now, aside from being a completely boneheaded political move, it's also an inappropriate way to discuss foreign policy with the White House, right? Especially of your own party, which is you call the head of Leg Affairs and say, we got some issues, can we come down and talk? They may not listen to you, they may not agree with you. Right. But this was some sort of ham-handed power play that blew up in their faces and allowed Trygve Republicans to say, see, they don't really believe it either. They don't really believe it either.
Totally. And that's a narrative that they're trying to get out there. But here's the thing. Remember when I said that, Republicans, they don't really care about policies and facts. They just try and build narratives around that connect with people's values. Right. So Republicans have owned patriotism, and all of us, quite frankly, were a part of that at one point. You beat the crap out of Democrats with the whole, if you're a patriot, you vote for Republicans, right? Meanwhile, Democrats would be talking about policies and all the rest. This is the perfect kind of issue for Democrats to build a narrative and not be embarrassed and get out and say, you're the ones who should be embarrassed. You're the ones who aren't loving America. They should be hammering them on that they're taking steps, that they're inventing crap. Call out their bullshit and own it. Be proud. Alyssa Slotkin, everybody that I talked to who knew her from her CIA days, raves about her. Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat Party, they would all have been Republicans in the days of Ronald Reagan. That is where they would have gone. The Democrats not only need to greet them with open arms, they need to learn from what they're doing. I mean, Spanberger, I'm here in Virginia, and Spanberger's district got moved up by the Virginia State Legislature to try and make it harder. So she's advertising in the DC area. She's playing up her patriotism. She's playing up the fact that she stood on the front lines in the war on terror and risked her life. Democrats have to do a far better job of not stepping away from, but they do sometimes because they're afraid of their left flank. Don't make the mistake that we made with thinking that you can manage, we all thought we can manage the Tea Party and we got Donald Trump. They have to not make that mistake. And I guess, when it comes to the question about Biden, that's the whole risk really at the end of the day is that they end up just being the Democrats end up being a few cycles behind, and suddenly you have a race between Donald Trump and somebody who's so far to the left that they're not viable in a bunch of these states. And my home state of Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, everybody knows Ron Johnson's an asshole. Everybody I know who's ever worked for Ron Johnson thinks he's the biggest asshole they've ever met. But Mandela Barnes has run to the left of Tammy Baldwin in a state that's right of center. And if Mandela Barnes loses, which he probably will, it isn't going to be because of the color of his skin. It's going to be because he ran too far to the left and had too much to fund the police and a bunch of woke shit that my buddies who can't stand Ron Johnson ended up voting for Tony Evers and Ron Johnson because of that. And the Democrats, if Biden doesn't run, could end up making that mistake in a presidential election, and then we're screwed.
Well, let me
There's
just
a
say
truth
this
bomb for you on the eve of the election.
Let me just say this, that we thought when those of us at the beginning of the Lincoln Project were together at the Cooper Union in New York in late February of 20, we thought it was going to be Bernie, right? That was where it was headed. The Democrat, you know, somebody needs to write a book on the machinations that got, you know, Jim Clyburn, notwithstanding, although we should thank Congressman Clyburn more than anybody maybe for Joe Biden's election. But all of those people understood, if it's Bernie, we lose. Biden, maybe not our favorite, but if it's Biden, we got a chance. And think about this, though, is that they ran the Bernie Sanders playbook on Biden, and it almost worked, right? It almost worked. If there's no COVID, like, it's a different country for many reasons, for many good reasons, because we don't have 1 million plus dead Americans. But also Trump's probably still in office, right? And maybe never going to leave. And so I think that that's one of those things where, you know, you have to decide in a crisis what matters most, right? What matters most? The things that you'd like to have done in a normal day, in a normal world, or the things that must get done to get through the crisis. And I think that's the thing, guys, as you're listening out there, right? You got to get out, you got to vote, you got to make your plan to vote if you haven't. Family members, friends, whoever needs a ride, go to jointheunion.us. We can make sure all of those things can happen for you. If you see things there, call your local sheriff's office, call your Secretary of State, call your registrar. Make sure if you see something, say something, right? But guys, there's not going to be any time. I'd like to tell you that, like, okay, we could take the next year off, right? Not going to happen, right? And in a deal like this, exhaustion is the number one enemy. But the answer to exhaustion is not to quit; it is to rest. And so, what I'll say to this is, you know, I thought we were going to get through November, guys, and maybe December before the Orange Cheeto decided to join us again, but that's not going to happen, right? And this is a long slog. And the fight we saw in 2016 will be different from the fight we saw in 2020, will be different from the fight that we face in 2024. We know our opponent, that's good. We know his biggest weaknesses, that's good. But it will be a different situation, guys. It's Epictetus, or one of the philosophers, says, you know, there's no, the river's never the same twice. Right? It's a different place now, guys. It's a different country. Everything's different. And
we know what he's capable of.
We know what he's capable of.
We know what he's capable of.
Well, history has shown that humans are very adept at fighting the last war, or preparing to fight the last war, and never ever anticipate good enough the next one. And that's a role we need to play, is helping get people prepared to fight the next one, because it's going to be different than the last one. It's going to be a lot different. It's going to be much more organized, much more professionalized. We're going to see that beginning when the polls close tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock on the East Coast in some states. It's going to be a much more coordinated rhetorical drumbeat coming out of Republican candidates in places like Phoenix and Madison and Harrisburg and Lansing, saying we didn't lose, it was rigged, and it's going to be a very coordinated assault, even that much more than we saw in 2020, that much more than we're prepared to fight today.
And I would say one other thing.
For us?
Yeah, one closing thought for everybody. On Wednesday after the election, I want people to get up. I want you to go on Spotify. I want you to go to the Rolling Stones, and I want you to play. You can't always get what you want, because what you're going to find out is, if you try sometimes, you just might find you'll get what you need. Democrats aren't going to sweep everything. I think it's going to be kind of a mixed bag night. But at the end of the day, if Josh Shapiro wins, if Gretchen Whitmer wins, if Tony Evers wins, we'll have gotten what we need. And so people have to take a deep breath and recognize we're not going to get everything we want in all likelihood, but we're going to get enough that we need. And then the fight starts in earnest at an even higher level.
All right, guys. And so, listen, on that note, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Trygve and Jeff, as always, for a terrific conversation. Remember, guys, tomorrow night, election night, special 2-hour edition of The Breakdown, 8 p.m. Eastern. Rick and Tara and many other guests. I think maybe we're on. I don't know. Somebody will tell us where we need to be. Usually that's what they do. But I just want to say thank you to everybody for your work this year. Get out there and vote, right? Take some time on Wednesday, on Thursday, on Friday. On Monday, we'll be back to work. Until then, I want to leave you with our closing spot for the cycle, and I cannot say thank you enough. Thanks, everybody.
America thought it was better than this. Better than weaponized hate and political assassination attempts. An example to the rest of the world, blessed with a tradition of peaceful, fair elections. Then came MAGA. Violence, hatred, and cruelty replaced the old Republican Party. When white nationalists, radical domestic terror groups, and QAnon crazies became the backbone of their MAGA party, millions of Republicans said, enough. Biden won with their support. Country over party, one last time. Soon, Trump will return. The worst of MAGA's extremist wing will dominate Washington. What you decide now decides what America looks like for a generation. You're making a choice. Their America or our America.
The Lincoln Project paid for and is responsible for the content of this advertising.